Hello,
Hey,
my name is Alex,
and I'm Val.
and we're here to talk about Sopranos, as
Yep.
per usual.
Yep,
We
season
just-
5, episode 10.
Just watched Cold Cuts, and we're here to talk about it.
We are.
And it's an interesting episode. Actually, I was saying just as on our way to here, for the first half, there was something that just like was not really holding together for the episode for me. In that it just seemed like there was this kind of theme throughout the episode of anger management, of dealing with your issues, of how the Sopranos in particular kind of react to, as that psychologist says, perceived inconsiderations, frustrations, or inconveniences. And the episode is kind of examining the impact it has on Janice and the impact it has on Tony. And Tony, even though he's upset about Janice's behavior, gets set off many times in this episode. Mm-hmm. He gets set off, I mean, so many examples. Carmela at the pool after she drains it. We have him hitting the pool cue, saying motherfucker after he finds out about, what does he find out about there?
I forget.
Johnny.
The Vespas, I guess.
Right, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, because I wrote down Johnny. My writing, I had a very dull pencil, so my writing is even more illegible than normal,
great.
Which is really something. But yeah, with Johnny Sack taking this Vespa shipment, we have later on with Georgie, of course, really freaking out and actually putting him in the hospital,
Georgie.
really hurting him and actually destroying his relationship with him.
Yeah.
To the point where Georgie doesn't want to see him. And then, of course, at the end, it's interesting because the way that it evolves for Janice is that she's actually doing better in a way. I mean, it's hard to tell because, I mean, Tony eventually does make her snap and makes her revert to her angry behavior. But we get the feeling that she's doing better. She's internalizing some lessons from anger management. Who knows if it would last? Janice is not the most solid character.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's interesting because Tony continues through the episode. He deals with his anger with Melfi. He sees it with Janice. Janice brings up that it's an issue for the business. Tony recognizes that. And yet he keeps on acting in angry ways. And that is his reaction to all these inconveniences he has in his life.
Yeah, I don't think it's just reactions to inconveniences that they have. Like, I think they actually, especially in that last scene, but you kind of see it in other places, like with the Georgie thing as well. Their reactions to like other people's joy or other people's kind of ease, maybe, that we have there. Like Georgie was just commenting on, you know, I want to like break that down a little more, even like.
Make sure you live every day. Seems like an extreme reaction.
Yeah, you know. And then of course that scene with Janice, which I'm sure we'll go into more. Mm-hmm. I don't know. For me, I didn't have that same reaction with the beginning of the episode. It kind of, I don't know. I kind of see it as broken down into these like mini storylines, and there is kind of this theme that goes throughout also of like the, you know, these, we do see a lot of water. We see, you know, this.
A lack of water in the pool.
A lack of water in the pool. So I want to talk about that. But we also see like the guys go to this place where, I mean, by the guys, I mean Tony and Chris go to this place that they used to go to as kids, up to the farm, Uncle Pat's farm. Yeah. And kind of have these experiences here. So it makes me think a lot about, especially for Tony, kind of where his psyche is at. And we see him walk away from that last scene wearing all black in this, like, he's like made a choice there. Yeah. In this episode. And so I don't know what it is kind of about the journey that he's gone on through this episode that kind of took him there. But for me, there is something about kind of seeing, like, losing the water in the pool, going out to the country, coming back. He did, like, when he first kind of was speaking to Janice about her anger, right? You could see, like, he was kind of torn by it in some ways. Like, he was kind of, like, rolling his eyes at her in some, you know, because she is Janice and ridiculous. but he was also very like sad, like thinking, I don't know, I kind of saw it as like thinking to himself like he could never be like that.
Right.
Like, and I think that's also his reaction to Georgie. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what I kind of mean about the joy or the ease or something like that. Like kind of going back to even that happy wanderer kind of imagery that he talked about back in season 2 or something. And like just kind of seeing who he could never be.
Right. Totally.
But there's something about the water draining from the pool too. Well, I don't know. We've been talking about him in the pool.
So this is actually going back to like for the first half, I was feeling like they had this kind of theme that was running through, but I wasn't sure what the intention was. But as it gets to the end, I actually think it's a very impactful episode. I actually really loved it. And what's really interesting is everything that you're saying for me leads to a point where Tony makes a decision, and he makes a decision to basically actively cause misery. Like, as he gets there, Bobby's happy when he sees Tony. Janice really does seem to be doing better. It is this house that has dealt with this major issue of conflict to the point where Janice and Bobby may have had to deal with a separation, which is something that Tony has had to be living through. But Tony makes this decision to say, I wonder what Harpo is doing. I wonder where he's eating his Sunday dinner. I wonder what his French Canadian for. I grew up without a mother. And at the end of the episode, we have Janice crying. We have Bobby having to console her, Tony walking out, and now he's happy. So for me, this is actually a pretty huge development for Tony as a character, because as shitty of a person as Tony has been, he hasn't actively chosen to cause misery for other people to this point.
We also see it in the scenes with Chris.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
I think that becomes a theme that evolves throughout the episode, because we have Tony Blendetto too. He's kind of fucking with Tony. He's fucking with Chris. You have this dynamic of the two Tonys and them kind of being above Christopher. And then Christopher feels like he needs to lash out on Tony Blendetto. And he deals with his issues differently. Like, Chris doesn't deal really with rage. That's not what's comfortable for him. And actually, as he's driving on the way home, he's crying.
Yeah.
So he has feelings that manifest themselves in a different way.
Yeah. Well, it's just that we see these two characters. We see Janice and we see Chris crying in this episode.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think was really relating the two of them together.
Yeah. And I think it's relevant because as we go into the last part of The Sopranos, I think that Tony becomes a less redeemable character. Mm-hmm. He becomes more of a person who embraces his shittiness and this kind of like hellish figure that he is. And I think that it actually is kind of a major moment that he does that and walks out happy, that actually brings him joy, because that's all he has. That's who he is. I mean, at the end of the day, he is somebody who basically just causes misery and violence and horrible things for the people around him. And I think that there's something else in this episode too, just in terms of people's power dynamic. So I think kind of what you were talking about, like Tony picking up on other people's happiness, there's also moments where he's picking up on a lack of control or a lack of power over people. Particularly in the first scene where he gets really angry with Carmela draining the pool. We were talking, I think, in the last episode about the symbolism of water and how that's kind of Tony's domain, throwing Carmela into the water, which is somewhere where he always exists, kind of having another sexual interaction with Carmela in the pool. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of examples. But the fact that Carmela chooses to drain the pool is a kind of power imbalance where Carmela's actually exercising power over Tony, and I think that makes him feel really uncomfortable. And the only way that he knows how to react is with rage and with anger. And that's kind of all he has. It's the same thing like with Johnny Sack. Like, he's out of control. Johnny Sack is exercising power over him, and he doesn't like that. And so he gets really angry, and in a way he can now exercise power over other people because he's damaging things or them.
We do see Tony, though, trying to contain his rage, like with the thing with the pool and Carmel. Like, there's a lot in this episode where we hear Tony breathing really heavily and, like, trying to calm himself. And when he's with Melfi, he talks about John Gotti, right? How, like, you know, like about these guys who he had a bad temper, right? And that's why it didn't work out for him, allegedly. But that the guys who came from the old country, like, they wouldn't get angry. They would just make sure you were dealt with later.
Right.
So we do see him trying to control himself, I think. But then I think by the end of the episode, once he makes
I think there's an evolution. And I think that in part, like those moments where he's controlling himself is part of the journey of this episode to him landing where he is. But
it is that breathing that we hear him do. Like it's very purposeful. The other thing that I was going to bring up, and I didn't write it down, and just kind of in line with that too, is that tie into him being really isolated at the top. So it's when Chris and Tony B are in the car, and they talk about that, how he's like isolated himself.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of that jealousy, or I don't quite know, or I guess just rage, right? Of not ever being able to be this happy wanderer kind of guy, that he is isolated. And you can see it like when he does get angry, when he breaks that pool cue, for example, the guys are really uncomfortable. That's not like, they don't want to see that. No. It's like too emotional of a reaction, right? Yeah. Kind of like the crying. I mean, in part, like Chris does that in private, right? He's not crying in front of the guys. And so there is this like aspect of emotionality. And I think, I mean, it's said twice in this episode, so we know it's important that Melfi says that depression is rage turned inward, right? Yeah. And she says it twice in their session. And so I think that relationship between anger and sadness is really important there for Tony. But the fact, in what I was talking about with other people being uncomfortable with it, is that they are both these really strong emotions. Yeah. And regardless of kind of how they're shown, it does make people feel uncomfortable. Janice's rage made Bobby's daughter, what's her name?
Oh God, whatever.
Really deep.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That's fine.
She didn't want to see her friends again. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Anyways. Yeah.
Well, and then for me, there's also something about that idea of depression as rage turned inward. Well, by the end of the episode, Tony is kind of making sure that it is being pushed outward. Like, he's not dealing with it. There's even a line from Janice about taking responsibility for your own anger, something that she's learned in this anger management. And Tony, like you said, he kind of looks sad because I think he doesn't feel like he could ever do that. So by the end, he's just pushing this outward. So whether it's his depression, perhaps manifesting his rage, or the other way around, I think it's all linked, and he's feeling a need to push it on other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, but I don't think at the end he's pushing his rage onto the people. I think
it's almost worse, though.
He's like pushing, he's just like being cruel to elicit rage or depression from others, right? He wants other people to be miserable like him. Yes. You know, and so he's trying to get them to stoop to that level, right? So whether it's making Chris cry or making Janice stab him with a fork. Yeah. He's able to do that. He's like, they talk about it in the anger management sessions too, like letting other people, like they talk about how it's like the angry person's reaction to things, right? Yeah. So he's able to control that, right? And they talk about like, oh, that means you're just letting people walk all over you, right? Like that you're not in a position of power. Right. And so he's doing that. He's taking advantage of that, right? The fact that he is in a position of power over these kind of fragile or sensitive people. Yeah. The interesting thing too for me in the end is, if we have an evolution of Tony's character in this episode, who does he become? Somebody who's pushing this outward, who's being cruel. Well, the obvious example of that in this show is Livia. There's kind of an evolution of Tony into a Livia character. Yeah. And I mean, Janice is actually doing better and dealing with some of her problems, even if it wouldn't last, in a better way than we've probably ever seen in the show. And Tony makes sure to take that away from her. Yeah. So for all the psychotherapy that happens in this episode and this show, dealing with the impact of mothers and fathers, which is discussed in this episode, in particular, like Sandy, Janice's psychiatrist in the beginning, is talking about how she was picked on by her father, which comes across as kind of bullshit, and Janice is in the same kind of situation where her relationship with her therapist is kind of what Tony is, where she's not taking responsibility. There are these easy outs and easy answers. Yeah. But we are constantly looking at the impact parents had on their kids and the lessons they taught them. Well, at this point, at the end of the episode, Tony kind of becomes Livia, who's the person who he blames everything on. He blames Livia because she's cruel, and he says that is why he is the way he is. Well, now he's becoming that person. Yeah. There is also reference to Johnny Soprano in this episode, right? And so we have like these, digging up these two Johnson brothers who were people that Johnny had killed for whatever reason. we have a reference to when he cut the finger off of Mr. Satrial at the butcher shop. And then we also have, there was one other one that I was thinking of. Anyways. But the impact, like, I wonder what the impact of, I was just going to say, like, just the reference to cold cuts, that also made me think of the scene in Satrial's that so greatly impacted Tony's depression, right? Or at least caused these panic attacks at some point of his life. Right? Yeah. Revenge is like serving cold cuts.
Yeah.
But I think that's an interesting one too, and I'm not sure like if I can kind of, I don't know, see a pattern or something like that where there was something about going out to Uncle Pat's farm that really like connected Tony back to who his dad was, because his dad was kind of that like laughingly cruel guy also, right? We see him kind of like joking around but then chopping people's fingers off, right? And Johnny Soprano did have rage.
Yeah.
I think. I don't think he was like a silent boss type.
Right.
You know? So, I don't know. So I don't know. Like, it was when it's with these Vespas, and when they were throwing these bodies into the water, we see them throw, like, there's one night that passes and they throw Chris's body in the water.
Yeah.
The next night, they seem to just throw one in, but it must have been a package of crushed up bones that they threw in the second night too. Something about that being related to his dad for me. Anyways, I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, for me, also with the bones and Christopher and Tony Blendetto, there was something about how these different characters deal with their feelings, how they deal with these kind of frustrations that are coming up in their life. And there was a moment where Christopher and Tony Blendetto actually do go over their feelings. And then Tony Blendetto says, I love Tony like a brother, even though he was joking about him earlier. Said, I know about this casino. I feel like I deserved it because of the time I spent away standing up for this family. All these things that were on Chris's mind, but he wasn't vocalizing. Like, he was holding inside, but they actually do deal with them in a way where I think it actually is more helpful than Tony ever deals with any of his issues in this episode, because he is isolated and keeps everything to himself. I think that's healthy. But it was interesting, even after they discuss that, Christopher goes back to like hammering this skull, because we saw how angry he was earlier with Adriana's. He's fuming about Tony Blendetto, and they do go over it, and I think it is helpful. But then that scene is left before they edit away with Christopher being the one who's like hammering the skull. So there is still resentment there, and these characters do have to deal with their anger throughout, even it's just constantly coming up.
Well, and then we also have like them making jokes about Christopher's recovery, right, which is like as cruel as the jokes about Harpo.
I mean, the Harpo is really in a class of its own in terms of cruelty, but it's not good.
It's not good.
And also, it's not a good look for Tony Blendetto, who was looking better halfway through the episode, but I mean, he's exhibiting that kind of cruelty, right? Because he's kind of just being cruel to everybody around him, even though he has this Ichabod Crane, which we don't even know about yet.
Well, they mentioned,
but we don't know, because it's clearly a sore spot for him.
Yeah,
he doesn't want people to pick on him for that. Even when
I think it's just because Steve Buscemi really looks like an Ichabod Crane.
Probably. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
But even when Christopher brings it up, we can kind of see the look on Tony Blendetto's face, and it does look like it pains him. So everybody's kind of sad and frustrated and angry. Everybody's dealing with these different things, and everybody's kind of taking it out on other people in different ways.
Yeah. What else?
We have the strangest edit of the entire series.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what is going on there.
Can you guys guess what it is? We'll give you a second. It's when Carmela walks away from Wegler in slow motion, and it freezes.
Slow motion free? What the fuck is going on?
I know. I remember when we watched this our last go around, and we were both like, what? Yeah. Why?
It is interesting though,
thing?
because I mean, Carmela's talking to Rosalie about, it just came into my head. I said that we're getting back together. We're not, but it obviously does kind of sow the seeds for us considering that they could be getting back together. Mm-hmm. There's something weird going on in terms of, okay, well now that exists in her subconscious for a show that's so concerned about the subconscious and psychotherapy. Like there's something there, the fact that she immediately does do that, and that is kind of nestled there for her.
Yeah,
I think
it comes after that scene where Tony does come to use the pool, and she's putting laundry in the laundry basket, and he grabs onto the laundry basket before she could take it away, and he says then, like, it wasn't all bad, right? And they're talking about throwing this engagement party for Finn and Meadow, and, like, that's how old we were.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of, I think that also sowed seeds for her to even say that to Wegler.
Yeah. I mean, I think Carmela's just so trapped. She really has no options. I mean, if you think about the realities of what she has to deal with, I mean, what could she really do in this situation? I mean, Tony has poisoned all the attorneys. I mean, realistically, the best thing she can probably do is to completely distance herself in any way possible. I think as the show goes on, we learn more and more how toxic Tony Soprano is. But it's very difficult. You have to imagine that her life would be more difficult in a way, but spiritually and morally better.
Yeah. There's something about her draining the pool with that too, kind of like trying to get rid of this toxicity. Yeah. Like, like you empty your pool when like the water's not clean or at the end of a season, or so there was something about that was like her attempt to try to, like she says like I think she even says that, like, poisoned all the lawyers in New Jersey or something like that. So for me, it was like trying to be cleansing. Yeah. But then, of course, he just keeps reappearing back in her life, right? And I liked, let me just see I just wanted to quickly go back to Janice. There were some great shots when Bobby was talking with her about her anger management, going to anger management. She's facing these mirrors, right? And we're actually watching the scene in a reflection for the most part. And we have Janice looking, there's like two Janices, which we've seen before, right? We've these two Janices. And I think like she was convincing in this episode that she might, at least on some level, have this other Janice inside of her. Yeah. I don't know if we can trust that, but there was something there. And then again, like, in this season we've dealt with, and in the whole series so far, but in this season we've dealt with this concept of the two Tonys. Yeah. Because of, the episode named Two Tonys, but also, Tony Blundetto being here. So I think that they're like examining this duality of characters and then kind of seeing where they're making their choices is really important. But I like that we had these two Janices in that scene. Yeah. There too.
Yeah, totally. How about Melfi talking about this time of technological and spiritual crisis, and talking to Tony about, instead of being inconvenienced, you blow. I think it's interesting to just kind of look at how the times are changing at this point in Sopranos, just as kind of a timepiece. Like, things have changed from the late 90s. Technology has obviously developed to a point where it's more pervasive in everybody's lives. Obviously, we're talking about this now in 2019. Things have gone pretty haywire since then. But there's something about Tony kind of finding his way in this new world, which is kind of related to him feeling like he came in at the end, which I think is relevant to a lot of these feelings of anger and frustration and powerlessness. So I think that the development of technology is a complication for these characters, and they don't have these kind of old world values. We can kind of see them disappearing. All these codes that the older generations had are becoming more difficult to kind of exist in the new world.
Right. Well, and we talk about these like new threats, and there is something about, like, again, these Vespas not getting delivered, and then that conversation that that Tony sees this news piece about how terrorists can infiltrate and like remotely detonate.
And that really affects him.
Yeah, that deeply affects him. Although I feel like in some way he also sees it as like an opportunity for him to like breach the ports or something like that, like knowing that only two.
Well, there's also like the hypocrisy is so ridiculous. I mean, like he's upset about the level of security from the ports, and at the same time he's manipulating the level of security at the ports to profit, basically at the expense of these shippers. So it's just like there's, again, it relates to Janice talking about taking responsibility for your own anger. Well, he's taking no responsibility for his own actions. He's taking no responsibility for his own involvement in these kind of larger issues.
Yeah, I don't know too much else that I would get from it. There's also a conversation, I guess, about computers when they're at Janice's house.
The G5.
You can buy one for $500 at Costco.
It's
or something.
Stronger than the computer that put man on the moon.
Yeah, I don't quite know. I think your reference to "in at the end" is astute. Like I think that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. No, but I think like that is like it's a sign of further changing times, right?
Yeah.
And he's already dealing with the fact that times have changed, and now he's seeing them change even further, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you cope with that?
And maybe that's why he's being pushed to being an even more miserable person as the times change. And maybe that's what precipitated Livia's cruelty.
Yeah.
Maybe times changed and became more difficult, and she became a cruel person. But you can kind of see the repeating, nature of what happens to the Sopranos.
Yeah, and that links into, I think, like this adventure into the country, right, to the farm. And we see Tony sitting there with his cigar. He's surrounded in green, right? Yeah. And he does seem really content there. And they're thinking back on these times, right? Or at least, Chris is talking about these times where they, Tony's used to pick on him and they used to, whatever, like Uncle Pat used to trick them into doing things or whatever. So it is this kind of like reflective time also and seeing what it was like in the past. The other reference that Melfi doesn't make, but Tony B and Chris make, is that they talk about Tony tamping down his feelings by eating. And there's a lot of like he looks really big in this episode.
He does.
And they make him look really big in this episode. So we're also seeing kind of the ways in which Tony's depression also manifests itself in other ways, or his feelings generally, right? Probably his feelings of rage as well. But he's definitely looking really big. And there's a lot of references to it. And fat jokes and
totally.
Louise saying, "You're so big."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet he's also calling Louise fat.
Yeah.
So just no accountability.
Yeah.
Or no self-awareness.
Yeah. The other, like, I don't know, you just kind of reminded me of it, and it's not really technology, really. Well, I guess it is. When they're up at the farm, there's 2 times, both nights, they're sitting outside, they're like eating a meal, or they're playing cards. Yeah. And Tony B looks at his watch, and that's like a sign, for them, like that it's time to go dig up these bodies, I guess. But one of the first night he does it relatively late, and then the second night or the second afternoon he does it, it's like still bright out. So I don't know, you're talking about technology and changes in time. You reminded me of that. Like he seems to actually be like, for someone who's like been away for 17 years, he seems to actually be like adapting. I mean, he's being a piece of shit, but he's getting what he wants.
Yeah. We're getting more of a window into Tony Blundetto and the complexities of his character. But it's definitely not all good. There's definitely some kind of darker aspects of his character that kind of come out. Cool to see Mark Margolis for me. Just watched Scarface. Well, we just watched Scarface. Val was doing work though the whole time. Who's Alberto in that movie, and more recently Hector Salamanca in Breaking Bad, showing up as Uncle Pat. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I thought that was cool. It's cool because we just watched Scarface.
I liked a couple things in like the early Janice scenes. I really like the idea of a soccer mom protection program.
I like that like whole news.
The whole news thing, with the news anchor at the end of the segment being like, haha!
You could call it a mob-related hit.
Yeah. But then we have that psychiatrist or psychologist on TV who talks about individuals being more prone to rage.
Yeah. Which is interesting. That, for me, almost kind of like established the theme of the episode. Individuals particularly prone to rage, like the Sopranos. I mean, almost any frustration, inconvenience, or perceived inconsideration will set them off.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of sets up the episode and kind of this theme that kind of runs through it.
We also have Tony referencing Janice killing Richie.
That's
secretly.
Right.
So we know Janice is an angry person.
Right. Well, we also know that Tony is a real dick.
He really is.
Because Bobby doesn't know about that. And I mean, he's only left to guess.
Yep. I thought it was interesting in the scene where he's beating Georgie that there's money flying everywhere. So for me, it's kind of like showing, I don't know, like that's, Tony's emotionality is not making him more money, right? He's kind of like
and actually that's discussed in this episode that is bad for business.
Yeah, like John Gotti.
I think that's
whatever,
that's good. That's a good one.
I want to just talk quickly about Chris and Adriana.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen much of Adriana.
We haven't seen much of Adriana.
And we don't see her with the feds this episode, which most of the episodes we see her recently. She
does
with the feds.
Kind of imply to Christopher, well, she does kind of bring up this idea of maybe leaving.
Them leaving, which we haven't had her bring up in a while. And Chris could either write or be a male model.
Both. I mean, as Christopher says, if he was a male model, he would be a success.
He would be. But he's a soldier. And he lies about being 14 months sober. I guess that's since he got out of rehab. But
that's true.
He's not.
That's right.
Or maybe that much time has passed. I never know.
Probably not. I think he's lying.
Probably not. I think he's lying too. And we have him talk about the Czechoslovakian guy.
Yeah, Emil.
The Czech.
Yeah.
And that was his first.
Yeah. Which
film,
we were privy. Yeah, which we saw.
Yeah. So it's interesting how we kind of come to that, and then seeing Chris crying in the car at the end of the episode. He's a really sensitive guy.
Yeah. That's it for me.
Oh. We see Tony is sleeping with his dermatology nurse, the one who took the thing off his head.
Yep, we do.
Which, that whole going back to that like having a kind of cancerous growth thing, that rage or depression or whatever.
Yeah.
And then she's a sexy nurse.
There you go. Good for you, Tony.
So that's good. Yeah, I don't know. Water, boats. Bridges. Yeah. Water.
Yeah.
Boats, bridges.
Water, boats, bridges.
I like how we start in the beginning of the episode and we have no idea where we are, who we're with, right? We just have these guys at the docks.
Yeah.
So see some more scenes around Newark.
Yeah.
And revenge is like serving cold cuts.
That's exactly the saying. Yeah. Tony nailed it.
It's interesting that that's his whatever. What's the word for that when you miss, like when you
what is the word for that? Like a misnomer?
That's like when you for a name. Maybe.
Malappropriation?
Maybe.
Neither of those? No,
probably both of those. That it does it elicits this meat for him, right? Like the concept of revenge,
which brings him panic attacks.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something that they've already established.
Yeah. But yeah, that's all I got.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
That was fun. We're getting near the end of season 5, and
is the next episode test stream? Yeah, it is.
I think so. Yeah.
Ooh, you're in for a good... If you haven't seen this one before, you're in for a treat next episode. So watch that and then come back to our episode on it.
Yeah. Talk to you then.
Bye.
Apparently I always end with see you then or talk to you then, which I guess doesn't make any sense, but at this point I guess I might as well stick to it.
What about talk to you next time?
Talk to you next time.
But you're not talking. I guess they are talking to them.
I guess we're talking to you.
Yeah. But if you want to talk
through
with
technology.
If you want to talk with us, you can always email us.
Email us. We love talking
With you.
with you by emails.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.